Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Clemons, and it's a pleasure to host you here today. We have a joint enterprise, the National Interest and GLOBSEC, hosting today's media roundtable with the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, Mircea Geoană, who is soon leaving that post. I am dubbing this the exit interview. And I want to ask our co-sponsors just to say a couple of words, perhaps. Paul Saunders, President of the Center for National Interest, over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve. We're really thrilled to, and of course to the Deputy Secretary General. We're really thrilled to be the co-sponsors of this conversation together with GLOBSEC. I don't need to tell everyone about the critical issues that are at stake for NATO and in European security more broadly, and we're excited to partner up with GLOBSEC on those topics. So
thank you. And Elena Kutzko of GLOBSEC.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here, and thank you for everybody who made it to Prague the other day. I just want to say 2 words why we love Deputy Secretary General Geoană. First, because he's done a tremendous job spearheading the work on the innovation within NATO, and that's something that we hope to continue going forward. And the second part, because he's from Romania, and Romania, one of those baddest countries who's done already a lot, pushing the entire NATO forward, and will do even more once Deputy Secretary General is back in Romania, hopefully taking the new position.
Terrific. And we've got Jacob Hobron here, but I want to give you Jacob Hobron, who I'm going to give the first question to, but I want to give the Deputy Secretary General a moment to say a couple of minutes if you want to set the stage for us. And then I'm just going to open the floor to our fantastic journalists here. Mircea?
No, thank you, Steve. And thank you so much for having me and National Interest and GLOBSEC. I just returned from Prague, a tremendous conference. I'm happy to see so many old friends, and thank you for taking the time. Listen, I'm completing my tenure here for 5 years. I've been doing this job in NATO. No need to say that this 5 years and the last period of time has been nothing short of probably the most transformative time in recent human history, because geopolitical unraveling we've seen before, and this is nothing new under the sun. But a combination of the economic change, the effect of the pandemic on the supply chain conversation, the rise of China, the ganging up between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, Venezuela, Belarus, and many others, but also the compression of technological revolution. If I'm not here to dub in any way the era that we are living in, but we are still believing that we are in the era of Industrial Revolution 4.0. I think we are already half of our bodies into the Tech Industrial Revolution 5.0. I've never seen something so transformative, so quick, and so transversal when it comes to both geopolitics and defense and national security, economic model, and also societal transformation, because this is something that sometimes we tend to forget. So 3 observations from my side, and I think questions are more interesting than my introduction. Number 1, in NATO, the first thing that we have done, especially after the war of aggression against Ukraine, we have gone back to the original, business of NATO to defend NATO soil and territory. We were in outer area, we've been in many places. We have discovered that in the end, we have to start to do something far more serious for our defense and security, that war is back in Europe. And this is a major strategic awakening, especially in Europe and in Canada. And this is something that Germany is also a critical country, because what the Zeitenwende means, in fact, for a large country like Germany, and a more specific country like Germany, with a pacifistic culture, with the specificity of this great country, we are seeing everywhere. And this is something that I believe is quite transformative. We never had such bold defense planning philosophy and doctrine in NATO since the height of the Cold War. Mm-hmm. That's massively transformative. The second thing that we are basically doing in NATO, we are trying to equip ourselves and also intellectually and mentally and politically adjust ourselves to a new definition of security itself. So I mentioned deterrence and defense and the hard thing of defense and national security and intelligence and all that thing. We are doing that. That's in our genes. But the second part, to embrace cybersecurity, energy security, food security, economic security, supply chain security, climate change security, and everything else, has been in itself a major political transformation in NATO. So in the last few years, and together with Jens Stoltenberg, we've done, I think, a pretty good job in convincing allies to have NATO as the platform. And you discuss not only deterrence and defense, but you also discuss, and we have a new annual meeting of national cyber coordinators. We are doing this with all allies. We have a new kid in town, which is called the National Resilience Coordinators Meeting. And we have also something quite interesting, and Jake Sullivan was here a few times, an annual meeting of national security advisors from all the NATO countries. And the last thing I would like to mention here, that there is also a big transformation in NATO, because as I mentioned, security is far more diversified than in its original meaning. And lastly, something which is in a way also sort of a tension, we remain and will always be a regional organization, a transatlantic organization to defend this space of the planet. Right. But we're also becoming more global because the risks to security are global, and even more than global, they are going all to space and even outer space. So what I'm saying that I've never seen for a big and like a little bit slow, a little bit bureaucratic from time to time, working by consensus, organization like NATO, now with 32 allies, to adjust so quickly to such a dramatic transformation. And there is something I really leave this job with a sense of I would say pride, or a sense of obligation that I think I contributed, and Jens also, that we managed to steer politically this organization in adjusting to such a dramatic shift in world affairs like we've never seen in recent history. And this is something I believe we've done quite well. Of course, there's lots to be done, and I'm looking forward for Mark Rutte and the successor that he will choose instead of my job to continue this important job at the helm of NATO.
Terrific. Thank you, Mircea. Let me go to Jacob Hobron, also our co-sponsor of today, the editor of the National Interest. We'll start there. We're going to go to everybody, answer, question, answer. Let's go as quickly again. Jacob?
I have a quick question. I enjoyed the GLOBSEC session in Prague very much, and it prompted me to wonder, when you talked about Germany, that Zeitenwende seems to have ground to a halt, that Germany is talking about cutting its financial outlays to Ukraine in half next year. There's no real sign that the Bundeswehr is improving its performance and capabilities. Is it in fact Poland that will assume a leadership role in NATO, and that Germany, which looked like it would become the major power after 1989, has essentially failed?
Listen, from the very beginning, we were treating all allies, big and small, in a way with a sense that politically we understand the difficulty of such a transformation, of understanding the danger of today's world. And Germany, the biggest country in Europe, has, as I mentioned earlier, a far more difficult political and cultural background than others in Europe. So that's why we are very careful and always encouraging and helping as much as we could the German conversation about Germany's role in security in Europe to move forward. And as a political guy myself, I've never believed that this will be an easy proposition, that all of a sudden you have the war, a Zeitenwende speech from the Chancellor, and all of a sudden decades of a different culture, a different way of doing things would just unravel and become perfect. So I think we have to continue to invest and work with Germany. Of course, Poland is 4.7% of GDP for defense. They're doing an extraordinary job. But if you look at the numbers, if you look at the geography, if you look at the GDPs, if you look to the bigger picture, we'll need everyone into that. Going in your logic, of course, we will see Ukraine as one of the major military powers in Europe. It is a fact. I think they've moved to post-Soviet era equipment faster than some of the current allied members, former Warsaw Pact countries, including my country of Romania, just because they're forced by these events. So I'm very reluctant in saying that a nation that is struggling to find its new pace, and in Germany it's not only the defense part, it's also the new economic model. You know, there is a big cost to be paid for the Russian gas, you know, cutting off, and I'm not commenting why it was like that before. Digitalization is lagging behind a little bit, but I have all confidence that this country will move forward, and NATO is in a way helping, because you have a neutral, if you want, convening player that is saying you need to do this and that, and I'm confident that Germany will go and will play its big important role together with Poland, together with Romania, together with UK, together with many other countries.
Thank you. We got lots of hands up, which is great. So everyone feel free to put your hand up. I did promise Steve Erlanger we go next, but then we'll go down. Ellen Nakashima, it's great to see you from the Washington Post, has joined us. So Steve, floor is yours.
Mircea, nice to see you and good luck with everything, if I can say that. Well, remember, Zeitenwende was about the German military. It wasn't about Ukraine, to be fair. What I want to ask you about is a lot of promises about spending more money. We all know 2% of GDP isn't enough. Particularly, it's supposed to be a floor, but it's still kind of a ceiling for too many countries. A third of NATO still doesn't get there. What is, in your mind, the most important thing the European members of NATO need to do to establish a reasonably credible European pillar for NATO? Because there isn't one now, in my humble opinion. That's my question. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Mircea.
Thank you, Steve.
Listen, I mentioned before the new generation of defense plans. They are very ambitious. And they're setting targets that are incredibly high for all allies, big or small. The question is not only if we should spend more, we should spend more. And there are 23 nations today with 2%, and everybody has a plan to get there. But to my mind, it's not enough only to spend more, but to spend better, and on what to spend. Because the real conversation here, Steve, is that for the US, our number one security assistance provider for Europe, America, that is today giving to NATO a lot, is not about which administration here. It's a strategic conversation on what and at what pace and at what cost should Europeans invest in strategic enablers, in things that today America might be called to use elsewhere, God forbid, because now you have three difficult theaters, possibly in Asia, in the Middle East, and of course in Europe. And that's a severe question for Europeans. And I'm more inclined today to speak not only about the 2%, which are very important, but have become a little bit of a more, if you want, a political/bureaucratic indicator than on what do we need, the quality of that, and then to move forward. European defense is very fragmented, as you know. There is a lot of national interest into national champions for defense. There is also a proposition in some corners of Europe that we should buy EU, which means don't buy American. So for us, it's very important to have a transatlantic industrial base where competition should be the name. And if I can find something Swedish, which is better than something British, or something better Romanian than Polish, I should try to go there. But the real conversation, Steve, is not only if Europeans should, we are called to spend more because we are in danger or potential danger, but on what, in which tempo, and which will be only at the end of the day, what's the bottom line in terms of how much money you need to spend. I think if we reverse a little bit the conversation from beating up the European allies not spending enough, everybody will spend more. Right. The question is on what, and with our American allies, mainly a frank conversation about what we need to have here and what America could and should eventually continue to provide for our security in Europe. That's the real question to me.
Thank you for your candor. I would say there are a couple of very tweetable lines in there, which we'll have to get you. But Andrew Roth from The Guardian. Andrew?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you very much for doing this today. At the recent NATO summit, and this follows on Stephen's question a little bit, but you spoke a little bit about political instability, and I think one of the big topics was also the kind of political instability in the US to a certain degree. There's a very large gulf in terms of foreign policy views from the two campaigns, the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign. And I was wondering if you can speak a little bit for what could be a very sort of radical shift in one of the main members of the alliance's politics going forward. I mean, this feels like sort of one of the most important elections for that in generations. Do you have thoughts about, I guess, how NATO is kind of dealing with that at the moment?
Thank you.
But to give you a sort of an empirical answer to this, I was joining this organization just a few months before the leaders' meeting in London, with President Trump, with Prime Minister Johnson being our host. And I was not here when 2018 NATO summit with President Trump just have had, his first quite vigorous appearance in world affairs, and also when it comes to NATO. I have to say, without knowing what the candidates would eventually do after one or the other would be winning the elections, but I know America well. I was a young ambassador for years in America from Romania, so I think I know a little bit the political establishment in America. I start to see, and that's a continuation of Steve Ellinger's question earlier.
Right.
There is a slow realization in America that it is arch competition for defining the world of today and tomorrow with China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and others that I mentioned before. America is starting to understand that they need their allies, not as much, but much closer to as much the allies in Europe and elsewhere need America. So I think on both sides of the aisle, the real understanding of what's the arch competition with China and the others, I think is making American political leaders on both sides to understand the value of the alliances. How do you translate it into political action? I don't know.
Right.
I've seen in the Republican convention a conversation about 3% of GDP for defense. I've seen more continuity when it comes to Kamala Harris, to what President Biden has been doing. But I'm saying something as a deep political sense, that in time of such huge competition for global supremacy, if you want, I think there is a realization in America that they need the big and small allies in Europe, in Asia, or in other places of the world as much as we need America. And I think this is the beginning of a real conversation about what should be done about that, and not how to decouple, but how to do a better job together.
Thank you so much. I think Jim Sciutto has also joined us from CNN. Hello, Jim. We'll get to you. Nick Bostev, let me unmute you. Please unmute. And from Orbis, go ahead, Nick.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your very frank comments. And I wanted to build on your answer to Steve to ask if you could extend your remarks on this notion of that we need a more integrated defense, industrial, and technological base among the allies. It's a conversation that we're having. What are you leaving to your successor, and what is the new leadership team at NATO likely to do to advance that further? Are there specific directions where we can say programs are coming online, or we expect that the next leadership?
Thank you. So, Mircea, please extend them, but don't extend too long.
Okay, I'll do it quite quickly. Yeah. At the Washington summit just a few months back, we adopted a NATO industrial base pledge. So basically, what we cannot force governments to do things, but we can play this role of a big convener, of a platform of convening and exchanging information about what one ally does. That's one. So that's basically a more systematic approach to what everyone is doing in terms to have a more robust industrial base. Second, we have an instrument in NATO which is remarkably powerful, and also I think industry is interested in what we call the NATO defense planning process. So this is a process that NATO and the US, NATO and Romania, NATO and Estonia, everyone, we are talking to each of these allies and say, okay, you need to do this. To UK, more, armor brigades, to America more enablers, to Romania more, I don't know, special forces. So in itself, this is a message of demand to the industry, and that's something that NATO also does in terms of being a convening place. And the third thing, and I end here, NATO is rediscovering the power of standardization that used to be and still is our gold standard. So to avoid a situation like in Ukraine, that a howitzer from one country is not shooting the same ammo from a different allied nation, we have to move in that direction. I see progress in terms of standardization, and also in terms of conceptual working in NATO. We are moving from interoperability to interchangeability. All these are powerful signals to the industry for what kind of demand they might expect from us, and that's good for business. Right. I think it's good for allies as well.
Great. Let's get Ellen Nakashima. I am unmuting you. Ellen, great to see you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. It's great to meet you here. I have a couple of questions, if I might. First has to do with Ukraine. The U.S. appears to have dug in its heels on not allowing Ukraine to use ATACMS inside Russian territory. I believe Estonia and Finland say the U.S. should loosen restrictions. What do other NATO members think? What is your view as Deputy Secretary General? And are NATO members coming up with alternatives to make up for Ukraine's inability to use such weapons inside Russia? And then separately, if I could follow up after that.
Thank you so much. Of course, it's a national decision for each of the allies what they want to give and under which rules of engagement they want to give those equipments. As a general line from NATO, we say that we should help Ukraine prevail in this war, and they have a legal and I would say international legal right to defend themselves, including in hitting targets on the other side of the border for those targets and those targets only that are used by Russians to wage war against them. So as a line of principle in NATO, we say we should give Ukraine what they need in order to be able to defend themselves. Now, on specific, what kind of weapons from which nation, we're a little bit more reluctant in getting into public comments about this. Now, you have seen the last Rammstein meeting process, and slowly NATO is taking over, and that's a decision from the Washington summit just a few months back, for us to take a bigger coordination role. I cannot say that NATO will be able to tell Washington or Warsaw or Bucharest what to do or not to do. This is not how we operate. But I think the more we see this kind of integrated demand and what we offer to Ukrainians will be an easier decisions for individual capitals to decide on things. And there is some form of communicating vessels between the decision of one ally to what another ally eventually could compensate with. Like in the F-16 coalition, you could see a little bit of that.
As potential next president of Romania, what is your view?
My view is that we need to help Ukraine stay independent and sovereign, because for me the concern is, of course, for my country, because if Russia, God forbid, prevails, Moldova will be in a very difficult situation. The temptation to go even further will be there. But I'm also looking as a guy with global political experience, what will be the lessons learned? Speaking of lessons learned by China and others, if we're not able to support a country that it's on our part of the planet in terms of NATO, what will be the lesson learned for China in eventual other situations? And that will be bad for global security. So I think we have all the arguments in the world, but how to do it again, which are the restrictions, which are the very interesting negotiations, always Ukraine asking for more and more and more, pushing the envelope, allies sometimes saying yes from the beginning, sometimes saying yes later. I don't know. And that's also political consideration for each ally to reflect upon and act upon.
Thank you.
Thank you. So you got both questions in, Ellen? Okay, great. Courtney Kuby, let me unmute Courtney here.
Hi.
Floor is yours, Courtney.
The significance of this, or if you even have any kind of a confirmation that in fact Russia has taken that that potentially strategic area. And then a second one, I guess following on Ellen's question, Ukraine is now saying that Kursk, the whole Kursk offensive, is really about shoring up or reinforcing the border there. But I wonder if President Zelensky or any Ukrainian officials have briefed NATO leadership about what the next step is there and what we can expect to see going forward. Is Ukraine going to continue to push further into Russia? I guess what's the next step in the Kursk offensive? Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have confirmation about, let's say, a deeper strategic breakthrough by Russia. But everything that we see, even in Kursk or on the rest of the big front line, are still tactical advances. We don't see none of the two sides having enough resources to have a strategic breakthrough and alter the balance and direction of the war. So yes, we could see some advance here, a little bit of advance in Kursk, but by and large, strategically, we don't see a major, if you want, asymmetry of resources for things to change in a significant way. So we anticipate the next few months to be more or less in the same logic. Small advances, a little bit more strategic here, but not really strategic in terms of the evolution of the war. And of course, the Kursk incursion by Ukraine, again, it's fully covered by the sovereign right of this country to defend itself against this aggression, because that's a place where they've been attacked massively and they took action in that direction. Of course, there is also risk in this incursion. There is also risk. We know it and we told them. Have they briefed us recently? Yes, we had a NATO-Ukraine council, I think just last week. We had discussions, of course, more specific discussions inside NATO, and they told us more or less what the intention was and what the plan is. But of course, it's their decision to decide. This is going to be a long war still, and I think that all these moves are indicating, the desire of each of the sides for Russians to continue to persevere in occupying as much as Donbass as they could, and for the Ukrainians to basically, cut off as much as of the Russian capacity to strike them from behind the border. So that's something that we believe is dynamic, but is not strategically relevant in terms of the outcome of the war.
Mircea, I want to go to
just really quickly. Would you call this a stalemate then? It's a long war. Neither side's really making a lot of progress. Is it a stalemate?
I would say it's a dynamic long war. That I would call it.
I want to go to Jim Sciutto next, but just real quick question about the state of play and some of the signals we sometimes get out of Moscow. Do you believe that there is significant deterrence in place that would preempt the battlefield use of nuclear weapons? I mean, I'm just interested in the nuclear question, which we haven't touched on. Russia seems to talk about it a lot. Are we prepared? Is there do you believe that deterrence is substantial enough to preempt that, or could Ukraine trigger, in fact, the logic that Vladimir Putin keeps talking about, that they're redefining their nuclear doctrine?
Listen, for a superpower in terms of nuclear like Soviet Union, now Russia, this is totally irresponsible. A responsible nuclear superpower doesn't have this kind of rhetoric. That's dangerous, that's irresponsible. Having said that, we don't see in real actions, other than this kind of rhetoric, which is, of course, also trying to influence our public opinions and to try to put pressure on our public opinions, not only in Ukraine, but also in our democracies. We don't see anything really changing in Russia's. And also, they know, other than the rhetoric, that an eventual use of tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine will be a game changer, and this will have consequences. I cannot say which ones, but also they know that we also work in a logic that is very respectful of not waging war and not starting a nuclear war, because this will be devastating for everyone. So we still believe that this is a very intense rhetorical instrument to put pressure on our public opinions and also on the Ukrainian people.
Right, but directly related, and I do want to go to Jim, but Ellen, Nakashima has asked the question, does NATO need to revive its nuclear doctrine in response to Russia's suggestion that it is doing so?
We are doing modernization of our nuclear posture. The nuclear powers in NATO are investing themselves. UK has announced, US has announced. Of course, France is in a specific situation, but that's another nuclear power. We have nations that are working on this one. So this is not a response to Russia's rhetoric. It's an evolution in the reality of technology. By investing in this, we are not preparing for nuclear war, God forbid, but we are working on a credible deterrence. And we know also from the Cold War that deterrence in the end worked.
Right.
And we hope that this will work again.
Terrific. Let's go to Jim Sciutto. Jim, the floor is yours. And I should tell Jay Solomon, Lara Seligman, Kim Dozier, let me know if you want to ask a question as well. So Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary General. I don't want to ask you a political question, though there is politics at the root, and I know that you and NATO and the other allies, of course, endorse the results of elections. The fact is that you have a candidate in the U.S. election who, yes, though at the convention they spoke about 3% as opposed to 2%, and will often take credit for that, has also openly questioned the value of and the U.S. or his commitment to alliances, not just NATO, but South Korea, Japan, and I've spoken, and I know some of the others on the call have spoken to former senior Trump officials who have expressed their belief that in a second term he would, if not weaken the commitment to those alliances, might up and pull out or take, U.S. troops out of Germany, South Korea, you name it. So, the basic question I have is there a plan B? Do NATO allies have a plan B for a less fulsome U.S. commitment to that alliance? And does that plan B include private discussion of no longer relying on the U.S. nuclear umbrella? Because it's not purely a theoretical conversation. And I'm just curious, can you talk at all about how you guys talk about that?
Big question. Mircea?
Thank you, Jim, for that question. I tried to answer earlier a little bit. I'm not here to comment about what candidates declare on the campaign trail. I'm here to say that we have been doing this, and we had moments in the 75 years of existence of this alliance which were very complicated. It's not the first time then we are, discussing these kind of things. There is no discussion about the plan B in NATO. We are working on the assumption, which I think is realistic, that we'll continue to understand that we need each other more than ever. Of course, an American president has executive power, but also U.S. Congress is very bipartisan, if there is a term like that. We just returned from Washington, and Speaker Johnson and the Republican leaders, they all understand the value of NATO. Is that something that we should take lightly? No. But in the end, as I mentioned before, we worked with President Trump before the last State of the Union address before he left office. He praised NATO. And we do hope that in the solemnity of the Oval Office, any American president will understand that America, in this huge struggle with authoritarian regimes, they need all the allies. So today, in terms of planning, in terms of political discussions, we are working on the assumption that we'll continue to work together with one condition, that European allies should really do more. And this is something which take very seriously. I'm a European myself. That's a correct criticism towards some of the allies over time, that we were comfortably living on the back of the American security umbrella to us. This has changed, and I think this will also have political consequences in America, in understanding that we are not just the ones who are, profiting from America's investment and taxpayers' money, but we also pay our part, not only in terms of mercantilistic view of 2%.
Right. Thank you. Paul Saunders.
Thank you very much. I have a somewhat broader version of Steve Clemons' question. Steve asked about nuclear weapons. And What I'd like to ask is, look, if we look at the way that Russia has approached its war in Ukraine, it's an approach that's been driven largely by how much risk Vladimir Putin is willing to accept. Do you see any possibilities in the future? I mean, how likely is it? Let me put it that way. How likely is it in your mind that Putin may be willing to accept greater risks in pursuit of his objectives and you know, maybe escalate conventionally for that matter? And what's the alliance doing to prepare for that possibility?
Great, Mircea.
I would rephrase a little bit my answer to your question. I would say it's a cost-benefit analysis, in fact. How much risk you take, what you try to get out of that risk-taking. And I think, and this is something that we just cannot measure here from NATO, what's in the mind of a person that has been staying in power for so many years and what's really inside his head. But we see a much bigger game here than the war in Ukraine, which is so obsessive for Russia and for Putin. It's an obsession about Ukraine, which is not totally new. There is also a bigger game. There is also the relationship with China and India and Brazil and the BRICS and the others. So there's a much bigger constellation of factors that I believe is absorbed and is factoring into the analysis in the Kremlin. This is not wishful thinking. This is just the fact that if they go in taking much higher risk, it means that they will automatically create a huge difficulty for the anti-Western coalition they are trying to build together with China. This will be a massive cost for the developing South. This will be a risk that I believe will not be, at least rationally, worth taking. So what you get in getting a little bit more advantage in Ukraine, you lose on a much bigger gamble, including for the future of the Russian economy, the status of Russia, and the status of the anti-Western coalition that they're actively working with China, Iran, North Korea, and the others. So that's a cost-benefit analysis, which is, I think.
So we've just got 5 minutes, folks. I've got Kim Dozier. I see Steve Collinson has come back on. Stephen, if you have a question, let me know, and we'll get you in line. Kim, the floor is yours.
Thanks. I wanted to ask, with the rising anti-Ukraine sentiment in places like Slovakia, France, even Italy, parts of Germany, do you attribute this to Russian disinformation taking hold? And how do you measure that? What are the what's the success so far of fighting it? Because NATO has a huge disinformation measuring operation, but how's it working?
Oh, thank you. That's a very important question, especially in democracies. Our public opinions matter immensely in everything we do. So I think there's a combination of some proactive Russian disinformation, misinformation, and interference in our democracies work. You've seen the recent report about US elections. We see that everywhere, and they use this aggressively. There is also something that they are using, which are some of the other grievances we have in our own societies. They're also very good in exploiting, if you want, other subjects that are not related to Ukraine, but are related to, you know, interethnic conflict, issues of migration, other discontents in our public opinions, and they basically try to steer those towards dissatisfaction with the governments and change of policy. There is also some part of the public that is also getting tired, honestly, and that's also an effect of democracy. Including in my country, there is a little bit of dissatisfaction with the fact that some bilateral issues in Ukraine, like the Romanian churches, we have a big Romanian community living in Ukraine. There are some frictions there. And also, I think Ukraine has to be careful in making sure that they keep their closest allies, including geographical allies, like Romania or Poland or Slovakia. With Hungary, you know a little bit, it's a more specific and more intense conversation. So the question, I think, is will be able to sustain as democracies the support for Ukraine? I think we are, and if we do a better job in communicating and fighting back against this information, I think we could keep a majority of our public in favor in continuing to support Ukraine.
And finally, we're going to go to Steve Collinson of CNN, and then I have one big question, so we'll do these as lightning round. The question is, to what extent has NATO acted to insulate itself from political forces in Europe and in the US? It's obviously happened with regard to future Ukraine policy, but it's clear that the populist forces buffeting support for the alliance are here to stay. So it's really the question of what are you doing to anticipate, really to hedge against the possible populist future, if I'm getting that right. Is that right, Stephen? Great.
Yeah, that's a very complex political question. Listen, what we are trying to do is to basically create a little bit more synergy between what we communicate and what we do in NATO and what capitals do. Because if we do it just from NATO, that's not enough. We have a great team, we have a superb team of professionals, and we communicate a lot on social media, on everything. So we do polling, we do disinformation campaigns, we use AI, we use everything. And that's why I think the key is that the communicators, the strategic communicators, the political leaders from all over the alliance, we amplify each other's messages and reinforce each other. And that's the only way, I think, to have critical mass to basically resist this bombardment of so many vectors and so many political forces. Can we ever be bulletproof? Never. But I think we can do a much better job in reinforcing the key narrative that if Ukraine stays as an independent nation, security in Europe will be better, economy will be better, democracy will be stronger.
Thank you. And in a final quick bumper sticker, good luck, in your next steps. But you will be, I think, announcing, if my sources are right, that you're going to be announcing your candidacy for president of Romania. I'm just interested in a kind of a friendly way.
Not from here, Steve. Not from here.
Yeah,
not
this fine. But I mean, I am just good. But as you sort of look at this question of what gaps are out there with regard to NATO and things, it's really about what's the next agenda that you, as a potential president of Romania, say, hey, this needs to still be on our agenda. We're not done yet. I've done a lot of conferences called unfinished business. What is the unfinished business of NATO that you, as a chief executive potentially of Romania, would like to see done?
Listen, it's clear that the war in Ukraine has changed the political geography of Europe. And I think now in Europe, in NATO, in the European Union, we'll have to see, a better, if you want, equilibrium between the traditional Western bigger economies and countries and the countries in the East, from Poland to Romania. So what I think should be done, in a way, I'm an experiment of the first guy from the East after with the newcomers to take such a big position. But this is more than that. I want to see more infrastructures, including strategic infrastructures connecting my part of Europe. I want to connect Ukraine to Europe, Odessa to Chisinau, to Iași in Romania. I want to connect Lviv to Cernăuți in Ukraine to my country. I want to see a little bit more defense industry coming to my shores. I want to see my startups having more money, and that's why we did so much in investing in venture capital in NATO to help those countries. So what I would say that I would like to, if I would do something, I would try to match the strategic relevance of my part of Europe, Poland, Ukraine, Romania, to give the largest countries, also in economic and technological terms. And if we do that, everybody will win, and I think it will be a good deal for everyone. So I'm not asking NATO to do things dramatically different, because I think we're doing good things. But I'm trying to see this organization saying that these newer allies that are, on the front line, I think they should be seen not only as a very interesting geostrategic players, but also geoeconomic and technological. As I said earlier, I see myself, Romania, as a multi-regional powerhouse. I see my country playing in all directions, 360 around me, from the Caucasus all the way to the Middle East, and from Central Europe all the way to the Balkans.
When is your final day?
Tomorrow.
So this truly is the exit interview. I want to thank everyone for joining us on behalf of GLOBSEC and the National Interest. Thank you, Deputy Secretary General Geoană, for joining us. We're going to try and do these from time to time with notable folks, but you are our first for this. I hope that my colleagues in the journalistic world found this a useful exercise, and we just wish you all best wishes in your next steps.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for joining us.